5D Mystery School. 5D Mystery School.
Welcome back to 5D Mystery School. Let's get into it. So, every creation story has a beginning. Every mythology has a coded start point. As you may or may not know, there are several different versions of how this reality began. In this lecture, rightly named Primeval Waters, we're going to follow the rabbit back into the hole and take a look at the Egyptian creation story, cycle of life, and death process. And we're going to sprinkle in some Greek mythology since it's pretty much a copy and paste from Egyptian text. Okay, so this lecture is going to start soon, so you have just a small window to catch up on previous lectures, especially the Deciphering Reality lectures, the Exit the Matrix lectures, and the Firmament lecture. Alright, so here's your questions. How do we get here? Where did the creation of this matrix take place? Are there any clues as to who the ambiguous creators are? Well, keep these questions in mind as we use the best evidence available to take a deep dive into primeval waters. In your homework, catch up on those previous lectures. See you soon. Take care of yourself. I love you. Peace.
5D Mystery School.
Hey guys, welcome back to 5D Mystery School, and the name of this lecture is Primeval Waters. So my intention is to make this lecture short. I'm going to try to keep this lecture to 9 parts. In this lecture, it's broken down by 3 sections. The first part is the firmament. The second part is inner earth or Argatha. And then the third part is just primeval waters. Alright, for sources, we have Egyptian Myths by George Hart. We have Eventio Fortunata by Nicholas Lind. We have Paradise Found by William Warren. We have the Book of Earths by Edna Kenton. And last but not least, we have the Book of Enoch. And this Book of Enoch is actually the Ethiopian Book of Enoch, the Slavonic Seekers of Enoch, and the Hebrew Book of Enoch. So it's the complete books of Enoch. So this lecture is a little bit more advanced than the previous lectures, so we're just going to be diving straight into the good stuff. So if you have not watched the Exit the Matrix lectures, the Deciphering Reality lectures, or the Firmament lectures, I would stop this lecture and go watch them right now. If you can't watch all 3, if you don't have the time, I would at least watch the Firmament lecture. Because the last thing I want is for anybody to get lost in this lecture. I'm going to preface the story a bit, and then we're just going to dive straight in. So, how do we get here? That's one question with a billion different answers. I mean, we went over several different creation stories, but I want to focus a little bit more on what was created, and then can we trace the creations back to the original source, or at least do the best that we can. So there's billions of different opinions about the shape of the earth, how we arrived here on earth, who the creator is or creators. And each different answer about the creation is just an opinion that was formed through somebody's own lived experiences and how they perceive and react to those lived experiences, which in turn forms your overall perspective. This is life. Everybody is living in their own movie, and in that movie, they are the star of the movie. Even you watching this, you are the star of your own movie, and each of us are here learning and evolving, having different soul experiences. You can call the human experience a school of thought, thus making the Earth simulation a mental world. Our brains perceive our reality, but our reality is nothing more but matter. And if you take matter at the subatomic level, then you would see that our reality is nothing more but vibrations of light, photons. It's vibratory energy that are particles that are always moving at a certain frequency. And that frequency determines your material composition. Essentially, it's the most meticulously intricate and elaborate design that the human mind can conceive. Now, when you touch a wall, that wall reinforces the idea in your brain that this is a tangible waking life. Primeval Waters Part 2, let's get into it. So when you touch a wall, it tricks your mind into thinking this tangible reality is the master reality. You never think, oh, I might be in a simulation. You see, you have waking life and you have the astral realm. During your waking life, the only difference between the waking life and the astral realm, besides the randomness, is that in the waking life, you have things that are tangible. So when you touch a table, what you're really touching is vibratory energy that is more dense than the energy around you, making it appear as solid matter. So therefore, the dense energy is given it the molecular structure that it has, forming the table. So essentially, when you touch like the wood table, this is what you're touching. You're just touching the molecular structure. Just like when you drink water, you're drinking the molecular structure, 2 hydrogen, 1 oxygen. Alright, so that's important to note. Our entire reality is vibrating at a certain frequency, and it is said to believe that 7.83 hertz is that frequency. So that frequency puts us in the 3rd density, in a 3rd dimensional plane that operates everything your eye can see. And the sun, the moon, the stars, they are also frequencies, and they all work within a mathematically astonishing firmament with unfathomable precision. So is this creation story just a fluke of a long and tedious creation process, or do we have some almighty ambiguous creator? So is this creation just the results of a long and tedious evolution process, or do we have an almighty ambiguous creator who has ways that are above our understanding? Well, to even begin to understand this enigma, I believe it is imperative that we first take a look at the ancient Egyptians. But whoa, hold up there, shorty. I'm not talking about the ancient Egypt that you were taught about in school. I'm referring to the ancient Egyptians that were right here in North America, that predates the ancient Egyptians that you were taught about. I'm talking about the original, the OGs, North American Egyptians, our ancestors. Now, a lot of what you hear can be credited to modern day Egypt only because the stories originated here in ancient North America. Their ideologies, their creation stories are almost identical, if not completely identical. So are these similarities just a mere coincidence, or is there hidden truth to the story? Keep that in mind as we continue. So in the previous lecture, we discussed the history of all races, we discussed some of the Tartarians and some North American ancient history. But before the creation of man, the actors came the stage that we call Earth. So where are we? What do we know with absolute certainty about Earth? How was the Earth created? Well, these are questions that might be above the understanding of most men and women, but not all. So then, let's continue to glitch the matrix as we dive deep. First up, let's re-examine the firmament. Primeval Waters Part 3. Let's get into it. Just as a reminder, I will not be answering any questions in my DM that was already answered in the firmament lecture. So as stated in previous lectures, especially the firmament lectures, there were many different ancient civilizations that believed that the earth was hollow with a dome above us called the firmament. Now to clarify, because I don't want you to be confused, they didn't call it the firmament, they had different names for it, but we'll get to that in a second. The earth being a round spinning ball hurling through space as shown by NASA is still a fairly new idea. And as one of the intelligent brothers in 5D Mystery School stated in the last slide, they're not like the rulers of space, but I believe that they are a good reference point when it comes to identifying how people have been misguided. All right, so let's get straight to the point, keep this brief. The saying, the sky's the limit, yeah, there's some truth to that. Okay, so if you ever catch yourself watching a NASA rocket launch and you think to yourself, oh my God, we just went to outer space. Well, technically you are right, because they took an air vehicle above the ground level, above the space that we occupy every day, and they traveled straight up to lower Earth orbit. So this version of outer space, yeah, that's a dub. And majority of those photos of space that we see here in the US comes from NASA, not a space agency. Never a single answer, nothing about space anywhere. Now, traveling through water is a completely different story. Now, the firmament has been measured, recorded, and analyzed by our government, and I'm going to show you some documents to epitomize covering up truth. Okay, so here's the introduction to a government document that shows that they were studying a flat Earth. Pause to read the highlighted parts. A comprehensive study of atmospheric refractions errors for optical instrumentation based on a flat Earth assumption will be published subsequently. The relationship is correct for a flat Earth and a flat atmosphere. A flat Earth and a flat atmosphere? That's not what they taught us in school. Let's continue. Pause to read this declassified document from the CIA. It says, one of these was a visual photometer of the daytime sky intended for measuring the brightness of the firmament. The truth is also hidden by fooling the masses with psyops like the Apollo moon missions. And just so that I'm not losing anybody, a psyop is a psychological operation, usually of a clandestine sort. And clandestine means kept or done in secret, often to conceal an illicit or improper purpose. Conducted in secrecy, withdrawn from public notice, usually for an evil purpose, kept hidden, private, underhand. So they have the overhand. Or done or kept in secret, sometimes to conceal an illicit or improper purpose. They use symbolism to communicate amongst each other while deceiving the common man. Primeval Waters, Part 5. Let's dive deep. Okay, so I want to add one more source. That is the first book of Adam and Eve by Rutherford Platt. Okay, so NASA, the first rocket launch from Cape Canaveral was in 1950. You can pause to read a little bit more here. And then 8 years later, they announced the discovery of the Van Allen radiation belt. And then 4 years preceding that announcement, they conducted Operation Fishbowl. It was a series of high-altitude nuclear tests in 1962 that were carried out by the United States as a part of a larger Operation Dominic nuclear test program. Flight test vehicles were designed and manufactured by Avco Corporation. Essentially, they tried to nuke our firmament. Shots fired at heaven. They wanted to put a crack in our firmament with these nuclear bombs. Why else would you shoot nuclear bombs into the sky? And it wasn't one missile, there were several missiles that were shot up in the sky, 1962. Now here's some quotes from that mission. Scientists have discovered something truly remarkable above the Earth's atmosphere. An invisible shield is located approximately 7,200 miles above the Earth that scientists are likening to the force field of Star Trek. Now that the scientists know the invisible shield exists, they are trying to determine how it was formed and exactly how it works. It's almost like the electrons are running into a glass wall in space. It's an extremely puzzling phenomenon. And Dr. John Mack of the Department of Defense says, nothing has or ever will penetrate the glass dome. And that's from Project Fishbowl. Now, just to backtrack just a bit, prior to nuking the firmament, CERN was created in 1954. And they created the internet the same year that they announced the discovery of the Van Allen radiation belt. And that was in 1958. And then 1 year later, the Antarctic Treaty was signed, covering all of their bases and traces to the truth. For a quick side note, the Cold War ended in 1991. The Soviet space program also ended in 1991, which lets me know that the US wanted to get the secrets of the cosmonauts. You see, the Soviets, like the US, also had advanced technology and they were studying the firmament as well. And most of the time in cooperation with the CIA, which is why the war was confusing. But it's a psyop. Actually, the Soviets and the CIA were studying the firmament at the highest levels. Here's some documents to substantiate that claim. In this document, NASA is studying the rigid body equations over a flat, non-rotating Earth. As you can see here, flight in a vacuum over a flat Earth. Here's another NASA document highlighted there, the non-rotating Earth. Another non-rotating Earth. Now these are all from the US government. We'll get to the USSR in a second. But these receipts are important, so pay attention. I didn't highlight it here, but you can see the equations over a flat, non-rotating Earth. Again, from NASA, you can see here a flat Earth. The Earth is flat and non-rotating from NASA. And most of these are hidden in hundreds of pages of documents, so you really have to dig deep. But I got time. As you can see here, a flat, non-rotating Earth, and again, a non-rotating Earth. Primeval Waters, Part 6. Let's get into it. So real quick, here's another way that the truth is hidden in plain sight. You might recognize this from the Disney intro. There is a firmament over the city, over Disney World. That is what that represents, a firmament. Moving on. So we're going to continue with the declassified CIA documents. Okay, so highlighted here, you can see having a component parallel to the flat Earth only. Okay, highlighted here, you have the Earth is flat and non-rotating. It's pretty cut and dry. Then here it says a model frequently used is that of a flat, non-rotating Earth. The most one can profitably simplify the problem is to counter an isothermal atmosphere, plane level surfaces in a non-rotating Earth. Top left, represent the kinematics of a rigid body for describing motion over a flat, non-rotating Earth. That's hot. In our minimum time to climb problem, the aircraft is modeled as a point mass and the flight trajectory is strictly confined in a vertical plane on a non-rotating Earth. Now, I'd like for you to pause this and just take note of the names that you see here. One thing you might notice is that these names are Russian. These are all Russian scientists at the highest levels. So I'm going to show you small individual studies that are part of the larger study. You can just pause to read these. I'm not going to read them all. Determining the coefficient of atmospheric transparency from sky brightness. Again, all related to the firmament. Here are 3 different files you can pause to read or screenshot and zoom in. The first one, again, just shows you that they were measuring the brightness of the firmament. Again, at the bottom here, you can see where it says assumption of a flat earth. And this may be unbeknownst to some, but when you're conducting an experiment, you have to make an assumption because you are trying to find the actual answer, which would be your conclusion. So an assumption is the equivalent of a hypothesis. And then once you get your answer, you can stop assuming. And I just wanted to show you the level of academia involved here. You can see the Astrophysical Institute of Academia, Science, and I believe that's Kazakhstan. So again, these tests and experiments were done at the highest levels. The Joint Council of Institution of Physics of the East, Institution of Physics of the Atmosphere, and Institution of Applied Geophysics. So in those documents, you saw the word optics a lot, or optical, and I just want to break down what that means. This is where we go from understanding to understanding, a science that deals with the genesis and propagation of light, the changes that it undergoes and produces, and other phenomena closely associated with it. So studying our firmament, they were dealing with the propagation of light, also known as photons. Dipole is another word that was used when talking about the firmament. Pause to read. For all of these definitions will work. So essentially, with dealing with our atmosphere, you're dealing with electric charges. We went over the electromagnetic field in another lecture, but this is what it refers to. And side note, since this equation is wrong, all major studies that are released to the public from academic institutions dealing with the propagation of light is not accurate. Now briefly, I just want to touch on anode and cathode and how it relates to the firmament. Primeval Waters, Part 7. Let's get into it. So I won't go too much into the technicalities of an anode and cathode. I just wanted to break them down and how they relate to the firmament. So essentially, an anode and a cathode can switch charges. In a galvanic cell, you have a positive cathode and a negative anode. In an electrolytic cell, you have a positive anode and a negative cathode. So what's going on here is the process of reduction and oxidation, a charge and a discharge. And the end result is providing power. And the supply power can work autonomously. So here, just want to pause to read. Alright, this is important, so take a note. A cathode, which is heated in the presence of a filament to emit electrons by thermionic emission, is known as a hot cathode, whereas cold cathodes are not heated by any filament. A cathode is usually flagged as cold if it emits more electrons compared to the ones generated by thermionic emission alone. Moving on to anode at the bottom here, let me get out your way. Anode, in the most basic form, an anode in electrochemistry is the point where an oxidation reaction occurs. Pay attention. Generally, at an anode, negative ions or anions due to its electrical potential tend to react and give off electrons. These electrons then move up and into the driving circuit. One more thing. Additionally, an anode can be a plate or wire having an excess positive charge. So we already covered that the Earth has a large electromagnetic field surrounding us. And connected to that electromagnetic field, you have an anode and you have a cathode. And with the use of powerful magnets, the sun and moon stay on this autonomous circular rotation, giving it a natural effect. So in a reality that was a simulation, this is how the sun and moon would stay charged. To clarify, this is the most basic explanation of that. Just wanted to throw this in here before moving on to the chief musician, a Psalm of David. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. So I would like to add that the firmament was also deified by many ancient civilizations. This verse says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." Again, I don't take this literal, so what does this mean? Okay, so God loved the world, the earthly state of human existence, the earth with its inhabitants and all things upon it, an individual course of life, the human race. Okay, so this is what God loved. And just to reiterate, the firmament means the vault or arc of the sky, or heavens. Heaven, the expanse of space that seems to be over the earth, like a dome, is in the definition, or firmament. The dwelling place of the deity and the blessed dead, a spiritual state of everlasting communion with God. Okay, so heaven is a dome. I mean, I don't disagree with you. But remember 2a here, we're going to come back to that later. Dwelling place of the deity and the blessed dead. So cryptic. The expanse means the firmament, his only begotten Son. Well, beget is to procreate as the Father. Primeval Waters, the great part 8. Let's get into it. Okay, so begotten is from beget, and it means to procreate as the father. Here are some synonyms of beget that I would like to point out. Generate, induce, produce, spawn, or create. And one more, bring about. Okay, and the definition of God by Webster means the supreme or ultimate reality. So God means the supreme or ultimate reality? The being perfect in power, wisdom, and goodness who is worshipped as creator and ruler of the universe. A person or thing of supreme value or a powerful ruler. A being or object that is worshipped as having more than natural attributes and powers. Essentially, anything can be deified as a god. Here are some synonyms: author, creator, deity, divinity, eternal, everlasting, father, Yahweh, maker. Just pause to read. So let me read this one more time. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Now keep in mind the definitions we already went over. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. Side note, here's Zeus. Zeus is a chief deity. Zeus is a god. Essentially what you're seeing here is the firmament gave us the sun. Sun, S-U-N. Now, upon seeing the word logos, you might just think about logo. This is most likely what their mind immediately goes to, logos. However, in Greek, logos means word. In ancient Greek philosophy and early Christian theology, the divine reason implicit in the cosmos, ordering it and giving it form and meaning. The Stoics defined the logos as an active, rational, and spiritual principle that permeated all reality. They call the logos providence, nature, God, and the soul of the universe, which is composed of many seminal logi that contain in the universal logos. Now here's the Hebrew translation of word. I'm going to borrow the feminine form of this word, which means bee, like a beehive. The bee and beehive is used in Freemason symbology. It's pictured here. It's pictured here. Pause to read the meaning. Notice the shape of the beehive. Here's another one, says holiness to the Lord. Why would they use a beehive when it's referring to the Lord? And one more here. So why is that important, or am I just being random? Because bee in Hebrew is derived from word. Logo in Greek means word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Don't let that go over your head. So if you hear somebody referring to logos as the beginning, this is what they're referring to, the Word. Moving on, Dr. Auguste Piccard was the first man in history to reach the stratosphere in 1931. He saw the Earth from 10 miles above and told that it seemed a flat disc with upturned edge. In his interview for Popular magazine, his son actually went on to reach the deepest depths of the ocean, so they say. I'm going to replay you a commercial that deals with his emprise.
When a man reaches the edge, after he goes as far as any man can possibly go, how does his son continue?
Primeval Waters, the Divine Nine. Let's get into it. Okay, so before we move on, here is a quick breakdown of the human experience matrix simulation. Alright, so the luminary that's known as Luna or the moon has a 28-day cycle. The phases are pictured here. Starts at new moon, ends at new moon. Let's call the new moon empty charge and the full moon a full charge. You see, the moon is likened to a phosphorus light body. It can take a charge from an external source without re-emitting that charge immediately. And here's a visual representation of that just so that you can better understand this concept. And phosphorus is on the periodic table of elements. So just like a battery, it can hold a charge. And the lunar phases that we see are just different stages of the charge being held. So if you have the moon as a cathode and the sun as an anode, the moon is being charged by the sun. And the sun is fluorescent light. So pause to read more about phosphorus. Pause to read more about fluorescence. Fluorescence is the emission of light by a substance that has absorbed light or other electromagnetic radiation. It is a form of luminescence. Luminescence is spontaneous emission of light by a substance not resulting from heat or cold light. It is thus a form of cold body radiation. It can be caused by chemical reactions, electrical energy, and subatomic motions, or stress on a crystal. Keep this in mind as we continue. Okay, so like I mentioned, the moon charges the sun, and especially during eclipses. When you see a supermoon, the moon has a full charge. Now I want to show you a video example of how the sun can charge the moon, how fluorescent light can charge phosphorus light. Roll the footage. Okay, so in the video that I just showed you, you can see that the Tesla coil is the one providing the light, and the light bulbs are receiving that charge, the phosphorus light. I want you to take a look at this photo. The expected learning outcome at the end of this lecture is for you to know what this means and how this works on a large planetary scale. Now, the sun and moon receive excitation from the electromagnetic field. As above, so below. So the sun and moon receives excitation, and so does your body. Keep that in mind. So you can say the sun and moon are like luminary disk, like wireless energy, wireless connection. We have a Wi-Fi sun and moon. Now, the saltwater oceans that cover about 71% of Earth's surface acts as a conductor. They're filled with electrolytes. Now, a main anode is the North Pole, and a cathode would be the outer ring. Some people call it the South Pole. The magnetic field provides the grid for the sun and moon to rotate around. You can call it magnetic levitation. And here's a video example of that. Roll the footage. Primeval Waters, Part 10. Let's dive into the deep. So I'm going to add another source that we'll get into in a minute. Heaven and Earth by Gabrielle Henriette. A must read. Okay, so the ocean carries currents by the movement of ions. You may have heard of ocean currents before. In this process here between the anode and cathode, you can see lithium ions being produced. The same process happens inside of a battery. Inside you have an electrolyte. Well, these saltwater oceans also have electrolytes. Side note, look at this map of the world. What's surrounding it? Yep, you got it. That's a nice wall. So inside of a lithium-ion battery, the cathode is an aluminum current collector, and the negative anode is a copper current collector. You can see the electron on the left, the lithium metal oxides in the middle, and the lithium ion on the right. And then the top, you have your separator and your electrolyte. So if you're thinking, why is that important? Don't worry, I got you. But before moving on, let's get some definitions out of the way. And you can just pause to read them all. Oxygen. Oxygen is a chemical element that constitutes 21% of Earth's atmosphere that is capable of combining with all elements. Stop right there for that one. For number 2, something that sustains or fuels. And that's true. What do you need to live? Exactly. Your body needs oxygen just like our reality. Oxidation, which happens between the anode and cathode, is the act or process of oxidizing, or the state or result of being oxidized. And oxidize just means to combine with oxygen. And we went over ionization before, but for a refresher, the act or process of ionizing something, conversion of a substance into ions, the state of being ionized. Phosphorescence, luminescence that is caused by absorption of radiation, and it continues for a noticeable time after the radiations have stopped. Fluorescence, pause to read this one. But remember, luminescence that is caused by the absorption of radiation at one wavelength. And also, the radiation emitted. Emit, to throw or give off or out, like to emit light or heat. To send out, like eject. To issue with authority. One thing I wanted to note, if you reverse emit, it's time, which acts as authority over a lot of people's lives. Excitation, conductor. I'm going to bring your attention to D1, a material or object that permits an electric current to flow easily. And 2B, a material capable of transmitting another form of energy such as heat or sound. Now that we got that out of the way, as above, so below. As below, so above. The first Hermetic principle. You are a battery. Here's an article from October 1910. The human body is an electric battery. Startling new discoveries prove beyond all doubt that electricity is life. So in this matrix, you are a form of a battery. When you hurt somebody else, what do they call that term in court? Battery? Did you hurt another battery? Alright, so getting the technicalities out of the way, how to define an anode and cathode. And pause to read this. Primeval Waters, Part 11. Let's get into it. And this is take 2 since TikTok likes to restart the app on me. Haters. Okay, so getting into some technicalities. This is from Thought Company. How to define anode and cathode. The flow of current. The anode and cathode are defined by the flow of current. In a general sense, current refers to any movement of electrical charge. Current flows in the same direction as positive charge carriers. For example, when positive ions or protons carry the charge. This is where we get ocean currents, or current C. Okay, real quick, let's go over electromagnetic field, or EMF. An electromagnetic field, or EMF, is a classical field produced by accelerating electric charges. It is the field described by classical electrodynamics and is the classical counterpart to the quantized electromagnetic field tensor in quantum electrodynamics. The electromagnetic field propagates at the speed of light and interacts with charges and currents. Outside magnetic field down, inside up. The electromagnetic field can be regarded as a smooth and continuous field propagated in a wave-like manner. Okay, so remember, propagated in a wave-like manner. We went over that before. The behavior of an electromagnetic field can be divided into 4 parts. Just pause to read. The electric and magnetic fields interact with each other, giving you the electromagnetic field. The electric and magnetic fields produce forces on electric charges. The electric charges move in space, not outer space. Remember, space just means a period of time. Okay, drill this in your head. The fields interact with each other. Changing electric field acts like a current generating vortex of magnetic field. Remember the word vortex. So in electromagnetic field, you have the clockwise spin of the electric male and the counterclockwise magnetic female. Your body also produces an electromagnetic field, your personal Merkaba. Okay, so the electromagnetic fields are generated by moving electric charges, which generates power, which can be seen here. You see, power lines are plugged directly into the electromagnetic field, and in turn, they give you power. When your phone needs a charge, you plug it in the charger, and you plug the charger into the wall. So your phone is connected to the charger is connected to the plug are connected to wires which connected to the electromagnetic field. And again, that's how these power lines generate power. And when power lines go down, it's a disturbance in the electromagnetic field. I'm not gonna get into the quantum field, but just wanted to show you this. Here on the left, you have inside of a quantum dot, and on the right, inside of an ion. In the quantum dot, electron relaxation leads to photon emission. And in the ion, photon absorption leads to electron excitation. I'm going to repeat for clarity. Inside the ion, photon absorption leads to electron excitation. So light absorption leads to electron excitation. On the left, on the quantum dot, you have an artificial atom. On the right, in the ion, you have a natural atom. Primeval Waters, Part 12. Oh hell, let's get into it. Okay, so inside of an ion, light absorption leads to electron excitation. In the middle of the quantum dot is an electron. In the middle of a natural atom is the nucleus. Now, a single photon is sent from a quantum dot to an ion. Now we get more into the simulation. But I digress, we're gonna stick with the firmament for now. Here I want you to take a look at this process. Ionic transport induced by magnetic force. You have your liquid electrolyte, and at the bottom you see how the poles of the magnet are being utilized. The magnetic field source and the external magnetic field. You have your electric double layer, and you have your hole, and you have one drain electrode and one source electrode. Here is a charged particle in a magnetic field. Consider a particle moving in an external magnetic field with its velocity perpendicular to that field. The force is always directed toward the center of the circular path. The magnetic force causes a centripetal acceleration, changing the direction of the velocity of the particle. Alright, so here's a super rough sketch, right? Let's say you have the equator moving clockwise. This means that you would have Polaris moving counterclockwise. And you can view the magnetic North Pole like the center hub, with the two disks known as luminaries moving in rotation. In a time lapse, it would look something like this, having Polaris deadlocked at the magnetic North Pole. Side note, if Polaris is gridlocked at the magnetic North Pole, it's a reason why it's called the magnetic North Pole. It's the strongest magnetic force there in the center. And that's why your compass points north to the magnetic North Pole. The magnetic force is pulling it north. It is the center hub connected to Polaris, which is situated inside the firmament. Scientists say that Polaris is 89.5 degrees, but I believe it to be 90 degrees, which puts it right over the magnetic North Pole, which is at 90 degrees. Phosphorescence is a type of photoluminescence related to fluorescence. When exposed to light radiation of a shorter wavelength, a phosphorescent substance will glow, absorbing the light and re-emitting it at a longer wavelength. Here are examples of that. And when the sun takes a trip to the Arctic region and they get like 3 months of sun, or like Alaska where you get 30 days of night. Here is the radiation being emitted at a longer wavelength. The luminescence known as the northern lights or the aurora borealis. This only happens in the Arctic region. Now you know why. This comes from Science Direct, recent progress in phosphorus-based anode materials for lithium-sodium ion batteries. Phosphorus has aroused growing concern as a promising anode material for both lithium and sodium ion batteries. However, you need a strong electronic conductor, like the oceans or the Arctic ice. And for clarity, here's the result of that. Primeval Waters Part 13, let's get into it. So, from NASA, the North Star, Polaris, and surrounding dust. Per usual, pause to read. Why is Polaris called the North Star? First, Polaris is the nearest bright star toward the north spin axis of the Earth. Therefore, as the Earth turns, stars appear to revolve around Polaris, but Polaris itself always stays in the same northerly direction. Northerly, making it the North Star. That's all I want to take from here because NASA's big cap. Okay, so I found this photo during my research and I think it's an accurate representation. So you have Polaris as the central axis, situated above the magnetic North Pole. Polaris represents the pole or magnetic pole. And as a magnetic North Pole, it is the central axis. So that means that the sun and moon rotates around the North Pole and the stars rotate around the North Pole because it is the center magnetic pull. Again, this is why compasses point north because of that magnetic pull. All right, and it creates this effect. A whirlpool in the sky, as above, so below. And below, you have the whirlpool in the oceans, the waters. The polar vortex, as mentioned in the Exit the Matrix, the Sims lecture. Clocks are great examples, right? You have the centerpiece, then you have the big hand and little hand rotating around the middle piece, the central node. And then, of course, the directions of a clock, you have the 12, the 6, the 9, and the 3. 6 goes into 12, 3 goes into 9, 3 goes into 6, 3 goes into 12, and of course 12 is 3. You have the rule of 369. And this actually describes the rotation of the firmament. Not the flat earth, but the rotation of the firmament. Alright, so I'm going to need you to use your imagination. Take a natal chart, put it over a clock, and imagine that rotation. That is the rotation of the dome, the zodiac wheel. A natal chart has 72 points, that equals 9. It has 12 different houses, that equals 3. And the houses are divided by every 6 point, 369. Now, these planets in the charts, they represent energies in the firmament. That's why when you have certain planets in retrograde or certain points, it affects your body because your body has its own magnetic field, its own Merkaba. And the turning of this firmament, the turning of the zodiac wheel and how it aligns, it determines like things that are going to happen in the world. Comets that are going to go off, meteors that are going to go off, wars that are going to happen are all determined by this rotation. So you can say the stars act like electric nodes. And these major planets are major sources of energy, vibrations. That's why when you look at a star up close, it's always vibrating. This is where the nursery rhyme, twinkle, twinkle, little star comes in. They are literally twinkling all the time. And you'll see all the colors of a prism in that star. That little electric ball of energy that's situated in the firmament. Okay, so this is a home firmament experiment. I'm just using a clear bowl with water inside and a source of light. So usually the sun, is rotating. I want you to watch the reflection on the wall. Usually the sun is rotating, right? But when the sun is out of your local area and it becomes nighttime, the sun is over here. Now look at the reflection, all right? Look at the reflection on the wall. Now ask yourself, what do stars look like when you zoom in close on them? All right, so let me give you another perspective with a black background, since this is usually our night sky. So here's the sun moving in rotation, and here is the reflection of the what we see on the firmament, and we call them stars. Primeval Waters, part 14. Let's get into it. Okay, so when observing a star up close, here are some of the forms that you may see it take. It's all sacred geometry and the use of sound vibrations on water, which causes cymatics. Okay, so we're not going to get into the sacred geometry right now, but I wanted to show you some of the shapes that you should be familiar with. You have the octahedron, you have the icosahedron, you have the cube, you have the dodecahedron, but you also have the hexagon. And these are the shapes that the stars take when they're vibrating. And when they're vibrating, they take on different colors of the prism. And often the word hex is associated with color. Now, sister asked during the live class discussion the other day, why do certain stars turn different colors the farther that they appear? Well, what you're seeing is vibrations at play, and the vibrations will turn different colors depending on the speed at which they are being vibrated at, as pictured here, and they take these forms. But a common shape among these, and one shape that you'll see the most in our reality, is the hexagon. This is why when they show Saturn's North Pole is in the form of a hexagon with the polar vortex in the middle. They're trolling because this is our magnetic North Pole's action. You have a lot of mountains which were really ancient trees that were cut down, but they take a hexagonal form. Here's an article by Joe Carmichael from Inverse. Hexagons are as close as science gets to magic. Pause to read. People get serious, they worship hexagons. Okay, so I want to bring your attention to the bottom of this paragraph. For instance, if you spin a bucket of water fast enough, the whirlpool turns into a hexagon. So, at our magnetic North Pole, you will find that the polar vortex would take on the shape of a hexagon, 6 sides. And you'll see subtle hints to this in our reality, like the Google logo, 666. Alright, so pause to read. It speaks about the basalt columns formed for lava flow, and they take on the shape of hexagons. And in Northern Ireland, you have the Giant's Causeway, and it talks about the tension from the lava cooling, and the cooling leads to cracks, specifically a 120-degree crack. And 120 degrees also happens to be a hexagon's interior angle. That's no coincidence, people. But the most obvious natural hexagon is the honeycomb, the geometrically perfect home for bees and their honey. Here's an example of those hexagons. Bees are encoded with the hexagon shape. The shape is written into their eyes. Not only the hives, but the eyes. Any student of science would be quick to point out the skeletal formula. We represent organic compounds with hexagons. Most organic compounds have carbon backbones, and carbon is super abundant and bonds well with other elements. When one carbon atom bonds with another carbon atom, the bond angle is less than 120 degrees. But when 6 carbon atoms bond, it's an even 120. Primeval Waters, part 15. Let's get into it. So let me repeat for clarity. But when 6 carbon atoms bond, due to electron pair repulsion and some other stuff, well, it's an even 120 degrees. As a result, 6 bonded carbons, benzene, make a perfect hexagon. As above, so below. So hexagons are all over the place in nature, from the biggest planets all the way down to microscopic compounds. And I wanted to show you a few more examples. Here's a pineapple, naturally occurring hexagons. Basalt columns, turtles, magnetic North Pole. Here's another turtle, cuckoo-ca-choo. If you don't watch Finding Nemo, you won't get that. The eyes of a bee, more basalt columns, mountains or trees, a flower, a snowflake, giraffes. You'll also find it in sacred geometry like Metatron's cube. and other forms of sacred geometry shapes. Bottom right, you have the hexagon formation. And of course, the flower of life is found on every continent in the most ancient sites. And these ancient sites are connected to gateway spots for inner earth and all on the Great Circle, like I mentioned in another lecture. And just in case you didn't know, a hexagon has 6 angles and 6 sides. So, when you see cymatics at play in the firmament, and most of them take on the shape of hexagon, that represents the vibration, the magnetic frequency. Someone DM'd me and wanted me to go further in the twinkling of stars, and I really hope that answered your question for you. And it's connected to the firmament. Okay, so when you think about the electromagnetic field, as above, so below, in the ground, in the firmament, ionization happen on both levels, excitation happen on both levels. And on certain points of the electromagnetic field above and below, you'll have discharges of plasma known as lightning. And you'll also have loud sound vibrations known as thunder. You'll often see the light preceding the sound. What you're seeing is elements at play that are causing these plasma discharges, which can be reproduced in a Tesla coil. I would say the lightning is phosphorus because its charge is a discharge. But just to clarify, these are called sprites, which we'll get into in a second. But remember, lightning bolts are phosphorus. But just like sprites, lightning is discharged directly from the firmament and from the electromagnetic field on the ground. Okay, so every lightning bolt that you see is just a plasma discharge from the electromagnetic field. And we cover plasma in the Deciphering Reality lecture. So these discharges not only come from the firmament, you'll see them being emitted from the ground. Here's another example, but remember, this is what you're seeing. But lightning isn't the only form of a plasma discharge. You also have volcanic eruptions. You also have blood plasma in your body. It makes up about 55% of your total blood volume. How do I get out of here? Primeval Waters, part 16. Let's get into it. So we left off talking about lightning. Lightning are plasma discharges in the firmament. We also have plasma discharges on the ground, and those are known as volcanic eruptions. And since the ground also has the electromagnetic field, you will also see lightning coming from volcanoes. And as mentioned before, lightning are plasma discharges from the firmament, so therefore you will see them in volcanoes because you have plasma coming from volcanoes. A lot of these volcanoes sit on energetic hotspots, which would explain why the eruption is the magnitude that they're at. Here's an article from thunderbolts.info, Earthquakes and Volcanoes. I'm just going to read a small portion from it. Over the last 200 years of reporting, lightning has been seen in the ash clouds spewing from numerous volcanic eruptions. Gigantic branching displays were photographed during the Mount Shaitan eruption in May of 2008. There were reports of ball lightning bigger than beach balls rolling around the ground when Mount St. Helens erupted in 1981. And the Ilahalauku produced flashes that lit up the sky for many kilometers. Large telluric currents have been found circulating through Earth's crust because our magnetic field induces current flow and conductive strata. So you have currents happening in the waters and happening on dry land. The amps that flow through the surface depends on the conductivity, just like the salt water is a great conductor. Now we spoke about the sun. Since the sun can affect Earth's magnetic field through geomagnetic storms, fluctuations in telluric currents can occur when there is an increase in sunspots or solar flares because they create oscillations in the ionosphere. I'm telling you right now, if solar flares were real, we would be fried, boy. Usually when people hear solar flares, they're thinking the sun is 93 million miles away, not underneath the firmament. Since the sun is underneath the firmament, if solar flares were real, boy, you rotisserie. Now, the lightning that's coming from the volcanoes is coming straight from the electromagnetic field in the ground. I want to show you how the lightning is coming straight from the firmament through these electric pulses and discharges. Roll the footage. Primeval Waters, Part 17. Let's get into it. So now we're going to move to this book, Heaven and Earth by Gabrielle Henriette. So we're going to tap into these sources, and then we're going to switch over to Agatha, Inner Earth, and then we're going to finish off with Primeval Waters. The firmament was actually the longest section, so we're not that far from the end. Okay, so with the readings, just pause to read. I'm not going to read everything. I'm just going to read you the parts that I think that stand out the most. Although this whole book is important, you should get it. Chapter 13, is the Earth the heart of a gigantic man world? Ooh. It has been said that the universe is an organic body exactly like the human body, and that the interior, that is the hollow part of the body of man, is and should be interpreted as the space between the stars and the Earth. Is it possible to calculate the height of the man world, which would shelter the Earth, since the circumference of the latter, which is to be taken now as a flat expanse, remember expanse is firmament, is said to be 39,840 kilometers, and that the dimension of the heart is approximately 1/13 of that of the body. And this would give us the figure of 517,920 kilometers, which, after all, does not seem so absolutely inconceivable compared to the immensities to which we have been accustomed in the past. Chapter 10, on the precession of the equinoctial point. In the first place, the sun, although its motions takes place in the reverse direction, is said to accompany the constellations to progress with them at a speed of 1 degree per day, and in this way to cross the line of the equator twice a year, on the 21st of March and on the 22nd of September, at the equal distance from the poles. So that one half of the earth receives the light of the sun, while the other half remains in darkness, a circumference which determines the equinox. And for this reason, the point of intersection where the sun is supposed to cross the equator is called the equinoctial point. But where in the first place is the need for the sun to pass the line of the equator to create the equinox? Or equinox, however you want to say it, don't make fun of my accent. This equal duration of day and night on equinoctial point is situated moves backwards, as in this precession. The sun, when crossing this point, will no longer be an equal distance from the poles. Neither will the two halves of the earth be identical, and an equal distribution of light and darkness over the earth becomes impossible. The theory defeats its own end. Well, damn. Go off, Gabrielle. Chapter 9, on the stars. There are definitely no solid bodies between the earth and the dome of the sky. The stars are not masses of matter, and they do not result either from projections like the satellite disk of the earth. The astronomers of ancient Egypt believe also that the stars were suspended from the dome of the sky by cables like lamps, and the fact is that on the very clear nights, filaments or lines connecting the stars of each constellation can be clearly distinguished. Talk to me nice, Gabrielle. Primeval Waters, Part 18. Let's get into it. So continuing with Heaven and Earth by Gabrielle Henriette, reading from Chapter 9. I don't want to make this too boring, but this part is very important, so please try to pay attention. Okay, from this we may conclude that there exists above the earth a network of ethereal cores, certain parts of which, particularly at the intersections, condense and retain permanently the radioactive emanations from the earth, thus constituting the stars, in accordance with the theory of Xenophanes. This does not exclude the possibility of any effects resulting from the influence of the dome of the sky or from the presence of the sun during the day. It is also evident, since all the constellations are seen to move in bulk, that it is the frame or structure, acting as their support, which revolves and carries them along. The stars are thus nearer the earth than the satellite disks which move on the vault of the sky. Okay, Chapter 8, on the phases of the moon and eclipses. The phases of the moon, which constitute a true eclipse of long duration, are not caused by the fact that the sun remains 28 days behind the earth in opposition to the moon, any more than in the case of the eclipse of only a few minutes duration. And even if then, when we are warned, in order that such an eclipse can be explained, it is necessary to assume that the earth has no atmosphere, which, considering existing circumstances, is not a very realistic proposition. Okay, she's spitting bars right here. It is said that the eclipses of the sun, when the latter and the moon, which are considered as solid opaque bodies, are in conjunction, thus producing an obscuration, and that in lunar eclipses the luminaries are in opposition to each other. But it must be remembered that The position of the sun as based on an inexistent advance of 1 degree per year has no connection whatsoever with true circumstances. And therefore, the conclusions which have been drawn from this are false from the very beginning in both cases of solar and lunar eclipses. We are also told in this respect that the black disk of the moon advances on the sun and then recedes, but the moon is never retrograde. Bars! Why should it become so now and again for a few minutes just for the purpose of an eclipse of the sun? Further, the moon is not an opaque body, and moreover, as it moves on the vault of heaven on the same surface as the sun, it cannot possibly pass between the latter and the earth. That's common sense. Eclipses are not caused either, as it might be inferred at first by a partial or total temporary extinction of the projector center, thus provoking an interruption of the luminosity on the corresponding surface of the projected disk, since the latter is extant behind the shadow, its circumference remaining visible throughout the whole duration of the obscuration. For the author, eclipses are due to an optical effect obtained by modification of the slant of the vault of the sky, thus determining an inclination of the disk. Like I said, this book is fire, but we're not done. Primeval Waters, Part 19. Let's get into it. Again, pause to read. This is all really important. It's really hard not to read this whole book, but we're almost finished with this book because we have some other books to get into. So we're right here at the bottom. There exists further an evident and important feature which has been overlooked so far concerning the position of other satellites of the Earth during eclipses. It can readily be observed that during these manifestations, certain zones of the vault are simultaneously aspected by other satellites. The degrees in question are the 28th of Sagittarius, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12th of Capricorn, 14th, 17th, and 21st of Virgo, and 2nd of Aquarius. There cannot be an eclipse of the sun or the moon on any one date without these degrees being simultaneously aspected by the other satellites. And it appears, consequently, that the combined influences of certain parts of the vault of the sky, which become sensitive by the passage of the satellite disk, contribute to the formation of eclipses. The correspondences between the longitudes of the disk and the true position of the sun or moon during eclipses should be systematically investigated in order to discover the connection. The fact that eclipses of the sun occur in certain conditions at the time of the new moon must be regarded merely as coincidences. There's no coincidences between the cycle of solar eclipses. The periodicity of the moon and the movement of the X-point of the wheel of constellations, which in this work is held to be an immaterial structure supporting the luminous manifestations called stars. Please rewind this part until you really truly understand it and overstand it. Alright, so pause to read the rest. The disks which have been observed traveling in space, sometimes at very high speeds, and which are called flying saucers, are also luminous manifestations. It must be agreed that they resemble, except as far as the speeds are concerned, the satellite disk of the Earth, and they have the same origin. Pause to read the rest. But let me point this out. There are two facts which are to be mentioned concerning flying saucers. Firstly, that practically all cases occur when Mercury, Venus, or Mars are either stationary or in slow motion, direct or retrograde. Secondly, that in all cases, invariably, the satellite disk effected passage either at the 8th through 9th, 10th, 14th, 20th, the 21st degrees of any of the 12 signs of the zodiac. Chapter 4 on the solid dome of the sky, pause to read. The Chaldeans and Egyptians regarded the sky as a massive cover of the world. In the Indian and Persians, they thought it was a metallic lid, or even a pyramid shape. Up until the 17th century, the Earth was always regarded as the center of an empty sphere with solid walls. And on this account, it was always represented with the cover. Pause to read the rest. The planets are not solid, opaque masses of matter as is believed. They are simply immaterial, luminous, and transparent disks. Primeval Waters, Part 21. Let's get into it. So switching over to the Book of Earths, and I'm just going to read you a short passage. The planets are a mercurial disk, moving by electromagnetic impulse between the metallic luminae or planets of the concave shell. They are seen through penetrable rays, ultra-electromagnetic, reflected or bent back in their impingement on the spheres of energy regularly graduated as the stories in the heavens. And, later on, they are further described as little focal points of energy, partially materialized spheres in the process of combustion. Comets are not great streams of fiery matter. They are tiny things, broken up bits of crystalline energy spiraling about the center solar sphere. They do not fly off into space and return. They plunge into and feed the sun. Neither is the sun 886,000 miles in diameter, nor distant from the earth 93 million miles. Since it is a body contained within the concave earth, given the earth's diameter of 8,000 miles, the sun diameter would not be over 100 miles, or its distance from the concave habitable surface over 1,000 miles. The revolution of the sun and not the rotation of the earth is a cause of day and night. Instead of appearing to rise above a convex surface, the sun simply comes into our sphere of vision in the course of its revolution, and at sunset goes out of the earth beyond the sea of hydrogen of the arc of the heavens. As to the moon, which is an interesting part of this reverse cosmology, it is to be first of all understood that there is an uninterrupted reciprocal interchange of substance from the center to the circumference of the shell, from the positive pole of the great battery to the central one, to the shell itself, described before a gigantic voltaic pile to the basis of the galvanomagnetic battery, furnishing the negative elements of the cell for the generation and supply of the sun's fuel, for energy. It is explained it is the destruction of matter as matter, and matter is the result of the destruction of energy as energy. Don't let that go over your head. The moon we see is projected or reflected from the great concave mirror, the metallic lemonade in the circumference. This moon is a sphere of force in the physical heavens, a sphere of crystalline energy upon which is implanted the picture of the Earth's surface. Okay, and for sake of time, I'm going to read you one passage from Egyptian myths. It says, "Here the sun god journeys across the firmament along the underside of Nut's arch body." Now we're going to transition over to the complete edition of the books of Enoch. Chapter 18. I then surveyed the receptacles of all the winds, perceiving that they contributed to adorn the whole creation and preserve the foundations of the earth. I surveyed the stone which supports the corners of the earth. I also beheld the four winds which bear up the earth and the firmament of heaven, and I beheld the winds occupying the exalted sky. Primeval Waters, Part 22. Let's get into it. Continuing with the books of Enoch. I perceived at the extremity of the earth the firmament of heaven above it. Then I passed on towards the south. Skipping down to 11. And there I saw a place on the other side of an extended territories where waters collected. 12. I likewise beheld terrestrial fountains deep in the fiery columns of heaven. Keep in mind where their waters collected. Now we're transitioning to inner earth. And in the columns of heaven I beheld fires which descended without number, but neither on high nor into the deep. Over these fountains also I perceived a place which had neither the firmament of heaven above it, nor the solid ground underneath it. Neither was there water above it, nor anything on wing, but the spot was desolate. And there I beheld 7 stars. Keep in mind those 7 stars. Like great blazing mountains, and like spirits entreating me. Then the angel said, "This place until the consummation of heaven and earth will be the prison of the stars in the host of heaven. The stars which roll over fire are those which transgress the commandment of God before their time arrived, for they came not in their proper season. Therefore was he offended with them, and bound them into the period of consummation of their crimes in the secret year." I believe what's being described here is what happens at the magnetic North Pole, but let's dig deeper. Now we're going to switch over to Inventio Fortunata. Okay, at the top it tells you how the earliest allusions of the Inventio Fortunata appeared in Rome in Ptolemy of 1508. On this map, it is a legend of somewhat to the following effect. It is written in the book of the fortunate discovery that under the Arctic Pole there is a high magnetic rock 33 German miles in circumference. It is surrounded by a sea that as a vase pours out water by 4 mouths from below. Around are islands, of which 2 are inhabited. Mountains vast and wide surround these islands, 24 of which deny habitation to man. And at the bottom here it tells you like the name of the islands, and I want you to take notice of one of the names is Hyperboreae, like Hyperborea. Now here's the magnetic North Pole with the rock shown on the map. And I want you to remember that Hyperborea was the home of the gods in Greek mythology. And this magnetic rock is another reason why the magnetic North Pole is the magnetic North Pole. Now, there were several different ancient civilizations that also believed at this magnetic North Pole entrance. that there was a great tree, a great rock at the magnetic North Pole, as pictured here. Now, why would they have a tree if it's a rock at the magnetic North Pole? Well, class, that's because the mountains that you see today are actually old tree stumps. And that will explain why many ancient civilizations had either a rock or a tree at that magnetic North Pole. Primeval Waters Part 23, let's get into it. Now here's something I want to reiterate. The magnetic North Pole is at the center of our flat Earth plane. On the clock, you have the middle dial that controls the large hand and the small hand. Now you have the zodiac wheel or the natal chart. Take this and align it like the clock and imagine it spinning on the flat Earth plane. Imagine it just going clockwise over the flat Earth plane, right? Like synchronizing. In the magnetic North Pole in the middle is the magnetic pull that controls the moon and the sun, the luminary disk. Now keep this in your mental as I reread this passage for you. There are two facts which are to be mentioned concerning flying saucers. Firstly, that practically all cases occur when Mercury, Venus, or Mars are either stationary or in slow motion, direct or retrograde. Secondly, that in all cases, invariably, the satellite disk effect a passage either at the 8th through 9th, 10th, 14th, 20th through 21st degrees of any of the 12 signs of the zodiac. These are very specific degrees, right? Now, if the zodiac wheel is spinning over the flat Earth plane, like the zodiac wheel is the firmament, you have the stars and the luminaries attached to the firmament and it's spinning over the flat Earth plane. That means that you have a synchronization of comets, meteors, these UFO sightings. They're like, it's a timer that goes off to where this zodiac wheel, this natal chart reaches certain degrees for these events to happen. Keep that in mind as I read this. There exists further an evident and important feature which has been overlooked so far concerning the position of other satellites of Earth during eclipses. It can be readily observed that during the manifestation, certain zones of the vault are simultaneously aspected by the other satellites. The degrees in question are the 28th of Sagittarius, 8th through 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th of Capricorn, 14th through 17th, the 21st of Virgo, and the 2nd of Aquarius. There cannot be an eclipse of the sun or moon or any one date without these degrees being simultaneously aspected by the other satellites. So certain degrees and positions have to happen in order for these UFOs to be spotted, these meteors to go off, these comets to go off. And when I say comets or meteors, I'm referring to the luminary disks that are emitting from the firmament. Okay, now, section 2, Inner Earth or Agartha. This section is just going to be very visual. I'm going to show you some ancient maps and what other civilizations believe this flat Earth plane, this simulation, this Earth, or whatever you want to call it, to be. Here's a Buddhist description. With each photo, I'll give you 2 seconds to look at it. As you can see, they have this energy and people coming from the center of the Earth. Here's another with emphasis on the center. Here's another with energy being emitted from the center. Here's another with the world system and continents surrounding Mount Meru at the center.
I'll get on TikTok at night, and I'll go through like my little conspiracy channels and, right? Did you know that there's other continents hidden behind the ice wall, right?
Primeval Waters, part 24. Let's get into it. All right, so continuing with the maps, we have this map that shows 1 ice wall, 2 ice walls, and then you have lands beyond the ice walls. Just to go back to this map for 1 second, Mount Meru, that's what some civilizations call the magnetic rock in the middle, in the center of the magnetic North Pole. Since the rock is formed like a mountain, it was called Mount Meru. Give you a second to check that out. This is another ancient map with emphasis on the center. My interpretation is this is like a torus field that's coming from the center. Where do you guys suppose the winds come from? Why do you think waves are always moving in the water? Here's another, and you guessed it, with emphasis on the center. 1 map, okay. 2 maps, scratch your head. 3 maps, okay, there's something at the center. Oh, but we're just getting started, there's more. But if you notice in the little square surrounding the center, it's kind of like walls. It's like mountains surrounding the center. It's almost like an ice wall. And of course, I've showed you this map several times, but you have the magnetic rock in the center, and then you have the 4 ways, which was described in the books of Enoch and the Adventio Fortunata that I read to you. Here's another one. You can see that the mountain rises up to heaven. And it was said in many civilizations that the mountain in the middle rose up to the heavens. Then at the bottom you see that you have the water surrounding it. And here's another one. The mountain reaches up to the heavens, and it's in the center of the flat earth plane. Here's what Thai cosmology has to say about Sumeru Mountain. Pause to read. Sumeru Mountain is considered the pillar of the world as well as the center of the universe. The mountain, supported, stays above the surface of the water. It is the residence of spirits ranging from deities in heaven to devils in hell. And you see on the top of the mountain is heaven. Here's another page to that, just wanted to show you. Pause to read. And surrounding the mountain, you have 4 springs. Now here's a park dedicated to Sumeru Mountain, and they made sure to put the centerpiece out over the waters and emphasis on the center. Now this creature can be seen as a fish or some kind of serpent eating its tail. And if you watch the Exit the Matrix, the Sims lecture, you know all about the Ouroboros at the magnetic North Pole. Speaking of, here's another illustration with the Ouroboros in the center mountain. Many different ancient civilizations believed this. They weren't bombarded with social media. They had time to study the sky, the surface, and they all came up with the same conclusions. The magic at the magnetic North Pole. Moving on. You might not be able to make this out clearly, but this is Mercator 1569 with the emphasis on the magnetic North Pole in the bottom left. And it shows you the 4 waterways. Side note, here's a short description of the Eventio Fortunata. Pause to read. Do you see it yet? No? I'll read it for you. Primeval Waters Part 25. Let's dive deep. Okay, so reading a short description about the Eventio Fortunata. The travel log is unique as it describes the North Pole as being magnetic and made up of 4 separate continents. That's it. That's all I need to read. Moving on. Oh yeah, the letters from Nicholas Lynn were sent to John D. Rockefeller, so they know. And I wanted to add this photo for anybody still thinking that the moon mission happened in the year 2022. Here's Werner von Braun on the moon, aka film studio. And of course, there's 2 sides to every coin, and to be a critical thinker, you have to look at both sides. Here is a depiction of the round Earth, but it shows the North Celestial Pole right over the magnetic North Pole. The celestial sphere is the apparent bowl or hollow sphere of the sky. Did they mean to put that in there? Here's another map, and apparently this was hanging in the office at the UN. Is that an ice wall? I'm confused. Judges say it's an ice wall. Why would they have this at the UN? Ask yourself that. Here's Gardner's diagram of Syme's Earth, and we spoke about him before in relation to Inner Earth, or Agartha, showing the 5 concentric spheres with their polar openings. And polar openings refers to the magnetic North Pole being open at the polar, the Arctic region. Here's another one from Syme's Earth showing the hollow Earth. And in this one, of course, they show the Earth as a globe, but nonetheless, it's still showing it hollow. Here's another one just showing the 3 world octaves. And at the very bottom, you can see it says Terra. And Terra is what some people call Earth. Here's another one, man in the world octave. And these are from the Book of Earths. Here's another one showing the world as the inner body of a man. I spoke about in Heavenly Earth by Gabrielle Henriette. Here's Hildegard's first scheme of the universe. And of course, as always, emphasis on the center. Here's the Turin Betis world map, circa 1150. These are painted Tartar and Mongol drums in their depiction of the sky and Earth in general. But you can see at the bottom right, they have the sun and moon underneath the dome. Actually, all of them do. Here's the square Earths, 6th century AD. Here's another map, and you can see that there are blowing winds in the Earth. Again, I ask you, where does wind come from? Pomponius world map from 1st century AD. Here's the universe of Pythagoras from 540 BC. This is the key to the Tibetan wheel of life. It's the journey of a soul. You have heaven, the human world, the animal world. Then you have the great judgment underneath the center, showing the judgment of your soul before reincarnation. Here's the world tree of the Mayas with emphasis on the center and a great tree coming from the center. Here's the world tree of the Norsemen, and the tree is located at the center, the magnetic North Pole. And at the top, the Norse call that Valhalla. Primeval Waters, part 26. Let's get into it. Okay, so now we have come to the final section titled Primeval Waters. And in this short section, we'll briefly take a look at the happenings at the magnetic North Pole. a whirlpool, a polar vortex happening at the center. And for this section, I'm going to bring in two more sources. The first is The Phantom at the Poles by William Reed. And the second is A Journey to Earth's Interior, or Have the Poles Really Been Discovered by Marshall Gardner. But first, let's go back to the books of Enoch and see what he was talking about when he described a great fire at the North Pole. What was he referring to? Is there a great fire in the Arctic region? Or is the great fire symbolic for something else? Well, keep that in mind as we continue. Chapter 18, verse 12. I likewise beheld terrestrial fountains deep in the fiery columns of heaven. The fiery columns of heaven. Okay. Well, let's not beat around the burning bush. Let's get right into it. The fire at the North Pole that Enoch was referring to is a reference to the aurora borealis. The aurora borealis comes from the beams of the black sun in the interior Earth. Keep that in mind as we continue. But if you watch my lecture at Exit the Matrix, The Sims, this is not new to you. You know exactly what's happening here. There have been several different Arctic explorers that have concluded that the Earth is in fact hollow, and that the entrance to the inner Earth is in the midst of a whirlpool happening at the magnetic North Pole, and that the center is surrounded by islands. Here's a visual representation of that. You have the center, and then you have it surrounded by 4 islands. And it has been said that the center has this magnetic mountain. Some cultures refer to this as the Great Tree of Life. And now, pulling from the book Paradise Found by William Warren, the central tree. In the center of the Garden of Eden, according to Genesis 3, there was a tree exceptional in position and character in its relations to men. Its fruit was good for food, it was pleasant to the eyes, a tree to be desired. Then it says, in the discussions of such sites as have usually been proposed, it could not, but if the Garden of Eden was precisely at the North Pole, it is plain that a godly tree standing in the center of that garden would have had a visible and obvious cosmical significance which could by no possibility belong to any other. In layman's terms, there is a central tree at the center of the North Pole. This was also believed by many ancient civilizations. And these ancient civilizations knew that you had the 4 islands in the center to the north, east, west, and south, like the news. Now, I would like for you to look at this Aztec calendar one more time and see if you truly understand the meaning. It's symbolic. You have the center and it's surrounded by 4 islands. It was known as Eden or Mount Meru or Hyperborea. And you can see to the left there it says Atlantis. We're going to tap back into Hyperborea in a second, but keep this in mind as we continue. Primeval Waters, part 27. Let's get into it. Okay, so now we're going to tap into Genesis chapter 2, verse 10. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into 4 heads, as pictured here. It's parted and it goes out to 4 heads. And in the center, you have a black sun emanating virile energy. And this black sun was seen by those German boys, and they had a faction called the Black Sun. Pause to read a little more about that. And as you can see, once they witnessed it, they deified it. It was also seen by the Vril Society. And we spoke about the Vril Society in another lecture. Important side note, part of the crew that witnessed the Black Sun was Wernher von Braun. And after World War II, there was something called Operation Paperclip, and Wernher von Braun was brought over to the United States, and he became the head of NASA. When Wernher von Braun passed away in 1977, on his tombstone, the only thing that he left was Psalms 19:1. Here's Psalms 19:1. To the chief musician, a psalm of David, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. To the chief musician. Going back to Apollo, Apollo comes from Mount Olympus. Apollo is the god of music. Apollo is symbolic for the sun. Please don't let that go over your head. Important side note, he is the twin brother of Artemis. Keep that in mind. Okay, so yes, Apollo is symbolic for the sun. Prior to Apollo, we talked about Helios. Helios is also symbolic for the sun. Apollo just became the modern Helios. Now, pulling from our source, Egyptian Myths by George Hart. Now, the ancient Egyptians believed that part of the journey of the sun was this journey through the underworld. And remember, the ancient Egyptians deified the sun. The sun was known as Ra, or Re. And as you can see here, during his journey in the underworld, he had to battle a great snake. Now, does the sun actually battle a great snake, or is it symbolic for something else? Take a look at this Enoch calendar. You have the 4 seasons: winter, spring, autumn, and summer. The sun is at its lowest point in winter, December the 21st. And at that point, Re starts his journey through the first scenario or hour of Duat and is depicted as a ram-headed god in a shrine and is called Flesh. Essentially, the sun starts his descent into the underworld. The underworld is the world beneath us, the world under us. The sun enters the area of the polar opening and then comes back out. Now, at the center of the magnetic North Pole, you have the polar vortex, and it makes the spiral pattern. You can also call that the Fibonacci sequence. And if you start the Fibonacci sequence at the center of the North Pole and you draw it over the map, then you'll find all of the ancient structures like the pyramids, they fall on that line of the Fibonacci sequence. Primeval Waters, part 28. Let's get into it. Okay, so to explain this from another angle, let's turn back to Greek Apollo. So, as mentioned before, Apollo was the Titan god of the sun. His twin sister, Artemis, was the Titan goddess of the moon. For a modern day reference, you might know about NASA's Apollo missions, and now they have a NASA Artemis mission, which they keep delaying. And if you go back to my Great Conjunction lecture that I did in 2020, then you would better understand Artemis and how they're probably going to delay it until Sagittarius season. But we know that rocket's not going nowhere. I digress. Apollo was born on the island of Delos. For a modern day reference, in the show Westworld, their home base was Delos. And his father was Zeus, aka a reference to the firmament, which was deified, or heaven. So Apollo being symbolic for the sun, he was also known as the slayer of the python. Yet another mention of the sun slaying a python. Other ancient civilizations associated the magnetic North Pole with the python, as you can see here at the bottom of the tree. And as mentioned in another lecture, that is just a reference to the Ouroboros. Apollo loved Coronis, who was slain by his twin sister Artemis for her infidelity. And for a modern day reference, we are coming out of the coronavirus, which is being preceded by the launch of Artemis. Let that sink in. I can't make this up. It's literally happening in our reality right now. Now, back to the journey of the sun. Think about this. Why does Alaska and Antarctica receive 30 days of night? Where does the sun go? Why does Norway receive 76 consecutive days of sun with no night? Where does the sun go? Why does Iceland receive perpetual sunlight from May 10th until July? In northwest Canada, the sun shines for 50 consecutive days with no night. And in Sweden, from early May to late August, the sun sets at midnight and can be seen again in their field of vision at 4:30 a.m. In Finland, they receive 73 days of straight sunlight. Why is this? And where does the sun go? The sun is making its journey into the underworld as believed by the ancient Egyptians. On December the 21st, the sun reaches its lowest point and it doesn't move. It stays at the same place until December the 25th. And in the Christian religion, they say the sun has risen again. Well, that is quite true, but not the sun that they're thinking about. But anyway, the ancient Egyptians believed that the sun at the end of his underworld journey exits the tail of the python and emerges as a scarab beetle. And it's important to mention, since Eden is located at the magnetic North Pole, Adam and Eve also was tempted by a great snake, yet another reference to a snake, in association with the magnetic North Pole. Primeval Waters, part 29, so divine. Let's get into it. Now we're going to pull from the first book of Adam and Eve, The Forgotten Books of Eden by Rutherford Platt. Okay, chapter 1, verse 1. On the third day, God planted the garden in the east of the earth, on the border of the world eastward, beyond which, towards the sun rising, one finds nothing but water that encompasses the whole world and reaches the borders of heaven. Verse 2. And to the north of the garden there is a sea of water, clear and pure to taste, unlike anything else, and so that through the clearness thereof one may look into the depths of the earth. So at the Garden of Eden, you can look into the depths of the earth. Another way of saying that is at the magnetic North Pole, you have an entrance to hollow earth. And of course, in the Garden of Eden, you have the great tree in the center. And in the center, you also have the great whirlpool, or you can also call it the polar vortex. Okay, so you have the Aurora Borealis at the center of the North Pole, and then around the South Pole, you have the Aurora Australis. But this is where the sun makes its journey back home. Or as referenced in the books of Enoch, this place until the consummation of heaven and earth will be the prison of the stars and the host of heaven. And this is the place where Enoch witnessed the great fire in the sky. Or as he said in verse 11, this is where the waters were collected. Alright, where the waters were collected. And as mentioned in the book Invencio Fortunata, the Arctic explorer Nicholas Lind actually went to the magnetic North Pole, and he described the 4 waterways and the 4, he called them continents surrounding the water. And the center being like where the water was coming from, like a non-stop whirlpool. That same description can also be seen in a 15th century Mercator map, as seen here. Now, I feel as though we have a good amount of evidence here, but I would still like to add more receipts with your order out of chaos. Now we're going to tap into the book The Phantom of the Poles by William Reed. I would like to add for credibility, this book is the result of more than 7 Arctic explorers. So in my opinion, this is the epitome of a great source. And of course, as always, just pause to read these. And in chapter 1, the flattening of the earth at the poles. Why is the earth flat at the poles? Our school books teach us that the earth is round and flattened at the poles, but they do not tell us why. If the earth is solid, this question cannot be answered. If the earth is hollow, the question is easily answered, as it could not be hollow at the same time round. For the opening to the interior of the earth would detract from the roundness just in proportion to the size of the opening. A ball cannot be made round and have a hole in it. However small the hole, the ball is not round to the extent. I told you to pause to read, but I read the whole thing. Here's some more, pause to read. The further one advanced into the interior, the longer would be the night. Primeval Waters, Part 30, let's get into it. So continuing with the Phantom at the Poles. Chapter 2, Length of Polar Night. Okay, I'm really not going to read everything, so pause to read. If the earth be hollow, and I contend it is, the facts account for the sun not being visible for so long a time near the pole. Like Alaska and Antarctica, you have 30 days of night. Turn your phone sideways to see a depiction of the home life in the Arctic Circle. Pause to read. Alright, if you are living in a valley, the sun rises later and sets earlier than on a mountain. The entrance to the earth can be represented as a deep valley, and the further one advances, the deeper it becomes. Alright, so keep this in mind. We're going to tap back into this in a second. In Volume 1, page 375 of Nansen's Farthest North, Friday, January the 19th, 1894, he says, "Splendid wind with velocity of 13 to 19 feet per second. We are going north at a grand rate. The red glowing twilight is now so bright about midday that if we were in the more southern latitudes, we should be expected to see the sun rise bright and glorious above the horizon in a few minutes, but we shall have to wait a month yet for that." Like 30 days of night as seen in lands that are closest to the magnetic North Pole. Chapter 3, Working Up the Compass. If the earth be hollow, what is expected of the compass? Let the reader take any compass and tip it toward the south. The needle will drop as far as it can, then tip it north and see how quickly it will rise to the glass at the top. If a compass will work like that in New York, why should it not do the same near the poles? And to clarify, in this book, they took the position that the earth was round with a hollow earth center, like I showed you in the Book of Earths. And here's a depiction at the opening at the pole. This illustration is presented to show how the magnetic needle works in passing into the interior of the earth, and how the compass would lead explorers out again, they not knowing the earth was hollow. Alright, so let me touch on the summary here. I claim that the earth is not only hollow, but that all or nearly all the explorers have spent much of their time past the turning point and have had a look into the interior of the earth. When Lieutenant Greeley was beholding the mock sun at 120 degrees, remember we talked about 120 degrees with the hexagon, he was looking into our sister world, the inner earth that you can enter at the magnetic North Pole. And when Nansen saw the square sun lined with horizontal bars, he was gazing on what may be the future home of his daughter. Pause to read these questions. Why have the poles never been reached? No poles exist in the sense usually understood. Why does the sun not appear for so long a time in the winter near the supposed poles? Because during the winter the sun strikes the earth obliquely near the poles. Primeval Waters, Part 31. Let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to finish up with this book, The Phantom at the Poles. Assuming the Earth is hollow, the interior should be warmer. Meteors are constantly falling near the supposed poles. Why? The next query is concerning the great quantities of dust constantly found in the Arctic Ocean. What causes this dust? One does not ask what this dust is composed of, for it has been analyzed and found to be carbon and iron supposed to come out of some volcano. What produces the aurora borealis? The aurora borealis is the reflection of a fire within the interior of the earth, like mentioned in the books of Enoch. And then of course just pause to read the rest. But 10, what causes tidal waves? Tidal waves come from the center, the whirlpool at the magnetic North Pole. Pause to read these. Some advance the theory that the moon starts tidal waves and keeps them going, but it is hard to believe, as they would have to travel more than 1,000 miles an hour, which is too fast for a wave of water. Why are the nights so long in polar regions? Pause to read the rest. And to finish with this book, pause to read these. Now we're going to switch over to the book, A Journey to the Earth's Interior by Marshall B. Gardner. Pause to read. There are 3 kinds of ice in the northern seas. The first is like melted snow, which become partly hardened, is more easily broken into pieces, less transparent, is seldom more than 6 inches thick, and when dissolved, is found to be intermixed with salt. Okay, underneath the confirmation of the polar basin, it says, but although Barrington had no suspicion of the actual shape of the Earth as our theory shows it to be, he did suspect that there was a depression of the Earth's surface at the polar circle. Now, under could it be reflection from the interior, it just, to summarize, it says that he saw a reflection of the sun coming from the interior of the Earth. And at the bottom here, under sounding the polar sea, to summarize, he talks about how the polar basin is shallow and has numerous unknown lands and islands. And here would be a depiction of that. Now, to summarize this part, it talks about how they analyzed the ice at the polar basin and discovered that the ice and the mammals that were found in the ice were frozen instantaneously. And my theory is that the Ice Age was actually a great reset, and that the ice wall actually was ushered in with the Ice Age, because studies show that area used to have warmer climate, but the Ice Age came in instantaneously, and therefore the ice wall, in my opinion, was formed from the Ice Age. And what the aurora looks like, he just describes how what he saw was very red and fiery, like Enoch has described it. What he saw in the sky was fiery. A particularly fine aurora, like a pillar of glowing fire from horizon to horizon. And of course, you can only see that if you're in the Arctic region. Primeval Waters, Part 32. Let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to finish up with this book, A Journey to the Earth's Interior. Underneath, not caused by electricity. The reader will notice that Nansen does not commit himself to the popular view that the aurora is caused by electricity. If, as some people think, the Earth's magnetism or electricity at the polar regions or around the Earth's magnetic poles were the cause of the aurora, there would be a constant relation between its displays and the different instruments which have been constructed to tell the presence of the magnetism and electricity. The compass would be affected and the electrometer would be affected. And there would certainly not be irregularity about these displays that Nansen describes above. And then he just credits another explorer, and this explorer describes how the aurora is not a constant show. Sometimes it's like glowing balls of fire, and then sometimes it's like streams. Pause to read more about the aurora. Pause to read more from different explorers. Now this illustration is the central sun as it would appear to an explorer when he reached the spot indicated by the letter D on the diagram if the atmospheric conditions were favorable. So again, in this book, they're talking about the Earth having a central sun. And that's really the point that I wanted to make and get out of this book. So in The Phantom of the Poles, you have the accounts of more than 7 different Arctic explorers, and here in this book, you have the account of more than several different Arctic explorers. So these are all credible sources who have been to the Arctic region who saying that the Earth is hollow at the center and that there's a central sun. They're not guessing, they actually went there and they saw it with their own eyes. But they actually went into the interior. As you can see here, a race living in the interior. They describe vegetation that's in the interior. So not only did they go to the Arctic region, but they entered into the interior of the Earth. And they're describing what they saw. Now, switching gears and going back to chapter 18 of the books of Enoch. Verse 3, I also beheld the four winds, which bear up the earth in the firmament of heaven. And I beheld the winds occupying the exalted sky, arising in the midst of heaven and earth, and constituting the pillars of heaven. I saw the winds which turned the sky, which caused the orb of the sun and all of the stars to set, and over the earth I saw the wind which supports the clouds. It's a lot about winds. Let's go just a bit deeper with that. Now, in Greek mythology, Boreas is known as the god of the north wind, the bringer of winter. Now I want you to ask yourself, before the Ice Age, did winter exist? And reiterate, did the ice wall come with the Ice Age? His father was Dusk and he came from Tartarus, the underworld. His mother was Dawn. His uncle was the sun and his auntie was the moon. I could keep going with this, but hopefully by now you see the symbolic meanings of what's happening here. And he was from Hyperborea. Primeval Waters, part 33. Let's get into it. Okay, so like I mentioned, Boreas came from Hyperborea. Boreas means the north wind, okay? The north wind comes from Hyperborea. The north wind comes from the magnetic North Pole. This comes from mythology source. I just wanted to bring in Norse mythology. Pause to read. In Norse mythology, we are living in Midgard, and then you have Asgard, which is the home of the gods, and it's ruled by Odin. Asgard was like a human settlement, but on a grand scale. Odin was only able to visit Hell, the underworld. The average man had no chance of leaving Midgard in life. The two worlds were connected by the Bifrost, a rainbow bridge that arched down to the world of men from the homeland of the gods. Whenever the gods wished to visit Midgard, the rainbow bridge allowed them to travel with ease. According to some poems, they went down to the bridge every day to reach their meeting place by one of the roots of the world tree, as seen here. Yet another reference to a tree at the center. Why do you suppose you've been seeing so many rainbows in the sky lately? Men can often see the Bifrost on Midgard, but it was impossible to find where it came down. Alright, and you might recognize this reference to Heimdall from the movie Thor, the guardian of the worlds. Alright? Now, before we end, I just want to show you some things, and hopefully by now you will understand what's happening. Here's a ring magnet. On a ring magnet, the outer ring is called the South Pole, and the inner is called the North Pole. And then you have a hole in the center. Just take a look at this. This is a CD, also known as a flat disc. Here's a Xbox logo, the green glow coming from the center. And from the center, you have the black sun that's emanating beams that creates the aurora borealis. Stationed right above the black sun is the central star Polaris, the center pole. The sun and moon rotate around Polaris. They rotate around the black sun. Our reality is coming from the center. More on that in a second. But if you did your homework and you watched the lecture, Exit the Matrix at Sims, then you understand what I'm speaking about here. As above, so below. The all is mind. The universe is mental. That's a Hermetic philosophy. This is a holographic universe. This is a universe of the mind, a simulation of the mind, a mental simulation. Oh, before I forget, here's the family tree of Boreas. Let me know a name that you see on there that's used in our everyday reality. Okay, so our reality has started in the Garden of Eden, the center of our plane, the magnetic North Pole. To better understand this, let's take a look at this declassified CIA file. Here's a description of the holographic universe. And here you can see that at the center they have a black hole and it says a white hole. It's the nucleus. And above you see it says the direction of time and space. In the figure C, you can see the torus field. This torus field is emanating from the center, as depicted here. The order out of chaos comes from the center. This image is from a high altitude vehicle, not a satellite. This is the North Pole. And in the center, you can see there is a hole. As above, so below. I want you to take a look at your eyeball in the mirror right now. What do you see? You have the iris with the hole in the center, and it's covered by a dome, your eyeball. And in the center, it leads you to the interior of your body. Here's another image of the magnetic North Pole taken on a different day. again showing the hole at the center. Pilots can't fly over the magnetic North Pole. They're instructed to go around the magnetic North Pole. On the left, this is from January 6, 1967. On the right is from November the 21st, 1968. The hole at the center looks like an eyeball. Now, I mentioned that the moon is a phosphorus light body. The moon gets its charge from the sun. Now, which sun? The sun that we see here in Midgard or the black sun? Let me simplify this for you. You see the sun and the moon at the same time throughout the day. However, you don't see the glow of the moon until nighttime. So I want you to really think about this. If you see the sun and the moon out during the same time throughout the day, yet the moon is not glowing and they're in close proximity to each other, then you can draw the conclusion that the sun that we see here on Middle Earth is not the one that's charging the phosphorus light body known as the moon. This means that the moon would be getting its glow from the black sun. Where is the black sun? The black sun is in inner Earth. Ignore the round Earth, but according to those German boys, they also heavily studied the central sun. They believe it was also in Middle Earth. And the beams from the black sun are coming from the magnetic North Pole or Mount Meru or Eden or Hyperborea. So this means the phases of the moon are affected by the beams of the black sun. This is an image from NASA. You can say that at our center we have a black hole, and from that black hole comes the beams which creates the aurora borealis. A black hole at the center, and this controls our space-time. You can say it's like a supercomputer at the center, creating a grand simulation, a holographic universe, a mental universe with the central supercomputer. And the entrance is guarded by primeval waters. Thanks for watching. I love you. Peace.
5D Mystery School. 5D Mystery School.